an original story narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. The rain pounded mercilessly against the cobblestones as the Duke of Blackmere fell to his knees, his fine coat soaked through and his dark hair plastered to his forehead. Before him stood Lady Evelyn Ashcroft, her face illuminated by the flickering street lamp, her eyes wide with disbelief as she clutched her shawl against the storm. The document in his outstretched hand trembled, water droplets blurring the ink that would free her forever from his name. 4 years had passed since she had vanished after his cruel rejection at the Whitley ball. 4 years since society had whispered that she was broken beyond repair. Evelyn's breath caught as lightning flashed across the night sky, revealing the face of the man who had once shattered her world with a few cold words, now kneeling in the rain before her. The morning after the Whitley ball, the servants of Ashcroft House discovered Lady Evelyn's bed had not been slept in. By noon, her abandoned carriage was found on the North Road, the horses still harnessed but grazing peacefully in a nearby field. By nightfall, all of London whispered that the Duke of Blackmere had destroyed her with nothing more than a few carefully chosen words. She simply vanished, Lady Harrington told her breakfast guests, stirring her tea with particular vigor. One moment standing before the Duke with hope in her eyes, the next gone like morning mist. What fascinated society most was not that Lady Evelyn Ashcroft had disappeared. Women had been known to flee from humiliation before, but that she had done so with such absolute finality. No tearful note explaining her departure. No dramatic gesture of despair. No whisper of her whereabouts reached even the most determined gossips. The Duke of Blackmere himself remained impassive when questioned, his aristocratic features betraying nothing beyond mild annoyance at the interruption. Lady Evelyn and I had a brief conversation regarding certain expectations that could not be met, he had stated coldly when Lord Pembroke dared to inquire directly. Beyond that, I have nothing to say on the matter. What the Duke did not reveal was the exact nature of their exchange, how he had led her to the terrace, away from the glittering ballroom, how he had looked at her with eyes like winter frost and spoken words that cut with surgical precision. I cannot and will not align myself with your family's interests, Lady Evelyn. Your father's expectations are misplaced, and your own hopes are regrettable. I suggest you direct your attentions elsewhere. The cruelest part had been his tone, not heated with passion or anger, but cool and measured, as if declining a mediocre business proposition. Lady Evelyn had not cried, had not pleaded, had not made a scene. She had simply looked at him with eyes that seemed to see through his careful facade, nodded once, and walked away with her spine straight, and her head held high. By morning, she was gone. The search that followed was perfunctory at best. Her family, embarrassed by the public rejection, claimed she had gone to visit distant relatives in the north. When weeks passed with no word, the story changed to a sudden illness requiring country air. By the time a year had passed, Lady Evelyn Ashcroft had become little more than an occasional cautionary tale, whispered to debutantes, a reminder of what happened to women who aimed too high. Only the Duke knew that something else had disappeared that night, a document that had been locked in his study, a codicil to an agreement between their families that would have bound Lady Evelyn to a fate far worse than rejection. But he never spoke of it, even as he quietly directed his solicitors to search for her whereabouts, even as he reviewed the reports that came back empty month after month. For 4 years, the mystery remained. For 4 years, the Duke of Blackmere carried on as before, managing his vast estates, fulfilling his duties in Parliament, declining marriage proposals from ambitious mothers. For 4 years, society eventually forgot about the woman who had vanished after a duke's rejection, until the day he found her. And on that day, it was not Lady Evelyn who would be brought to her knees. The Duke of Blackmere stood at the window of his study, watching rain streak the glass. 4 years had passed since that night, yet it returned to him in moments like this, when the weather matched his mood, and the weight of Blackmere pressed heavily upon his shoulders. Your Grace, his secretary said from the doorway, the quarterly accounts from the northern estates have arrived. Blackmere nodded without turning. Leave them on the desk. I'll review them tonight. The door closed silently, and he was alone again with the rain and his thoughts. He moved to the desk, a massive oak piece that had served 6 generations of dukes before him. The ledgers waited, bound in leather, and demanding his attention. This was his life now, had always been his life, a carefully constructed world of duty and responsibility. He opened the first ledger, forcing himself to focus on columns of numbers that represented the livelihood of hundreds who depended on Blackmere land. His finger traced down the page, stopping suddenly at an entry that seemed out of place. Quarterly disbursement to Northfield County Dispensary. He read aloud. £200. He frowned. The dispensary was not a regular beneficiary of Blackmere funds. He turned back several pages, finding similar entries dating back nearly 3 years. Each quarter, money flowing from his estates to this small medical facility he'd never personally visited. A memory surfaced, Lady Evelyn at the Harrington Garden Party, speaking passionately about the need for medical care for common people. He had been struck then by her practical knowledge, so different from the superficial concerns of most society women. "You find my interest in medicine unseemly, Your Grace?" she had asked, noticing his surprise. "Not unseemly," he had replied. "Unexpected." She had smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her ordinary features into something memorable. "My mother died for want of proper care. I believe that makes medicine everyone's concern." He had almost smiled back. Almost. Blackmere closed the ledger and reached for the second. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows as if demanding entry. Like memory, it would not be denied. He had not always been so cold. As a young man, before inheriting the dukedom at 26, he had even been described as amiable. But 4 years as the Duke of Blackmere had taught him that amiability was a luxury he could not afford. His father had nearly bankrupted the estate with his amiability, his willingness to trust, his reluctance to make difficult decisions. When the codicil appeared, secretly added to his father's will by his uncle, Blackmere had understood just how dangerous sentiment could be. The document had laid out in clear terms that the entailment of certain properties would be contingent upon a marriage alliance with the Ashcroft family. Lady Evelyn had been the unwitting pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. He had destroyed the codicil, of course, had his solicitors draw up new documents securing the entailment without conditions. But he had also destroyed something else that night on the terrace, the quiet dignity in Lady Evelyn's eyes when he rejected her so coldly. He had told himself it was necessary, that allowing her to believe he found her personally objectionable was kinder than revealing her family's machinations, that his cruelty was, in its way, a protection. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, grateful for the distraction. His steward appeared, looking troubled. "Your Grace, I've found some irregularities in the estate records. Payments authorized under your seal that don't appear in the main ledgers." Blackmere frowned. "What sort of payments?" "Support for a small property in Northfield County, a cottage and adjoining lands. The funds have been drawn quarterly for nearly 4 years now." "And who occupies this property?" The steward hesitated. "A Mrs. Ellen Ashton, Your Grace. A widow, according to the local vicar." Something in the name caught Blackmere's attention. Ashton, so close to Ashcroft. And Ellen, Evelyn's middle name, had been Eleanor. "Is there a description of this widow?" he asked, keeping his voice level. "Only that she arrived 4 years ago and keeps mostly to herself. She apparently works at the county dispensary." The dispensary that was receiving Blackmere funds. Funds he had not personally directed. "Bring me all records related to these payments," Blackmere ordered, "and have my carriage prepared. I will be traveling to Northfield tomorrow." After the steward left, Blackmere returned to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. If Lady Evelyn was indeed living as Mrs. Ashton, what had driven her to such desperate measures? And who had been using his seal to provide for her? The answer came in a flash of memory. His father's old solicitor, Hargreaves, who had handled the codicil, who had seen Blackmere destroy it, who had perhaps understood better than Blackmere himself what that destruction had cost. For the first time in 4 years, the Duke of Blackmere felt something crack in his carefully constructed world. If Lady Evelyn had built a new life, what right did he have to disrupt it? Yet if someone had been using his resources without his knowledge, even for a purpose he might approve, that could not stand. He would go to Northfield. He would see this Mrs. Ashton for himself. And then he would decide what justice required. What he did not admit, even to himself, was the possibility that it was not justice he sought, but absolution. Northfield County welcomed the Duke of Blackmere with the deference due his rank, but little of the excitement his visits usually generated. This remote corner of his holdings saw him rarely, and the small market town seemed almost indifferent to his arrival. It suited his purpose perfectly. He took rooms at the local, under the name Mr. Black, claiming to be a solicitor from London, with business in the area. The innkeeper barely glanced at him, too busy managing the modest establishment to scrutinize one more traveler. "The dispensary?" the innkeeper repeated when Blackmere inquired. "Just past the church, sir, can't miss it. Stone building with a blue door. They do good work there, they do." Mrs. Ashton sees to that. Blackmere nodded his thanks and stepped out into the misty morning. The dispensary was indeed easy to find, a solid structure that showed signs of recent repair. Through the windows, he could see movement, people waiting on benches, a woman in an apron distributing what appeared to be medicine. He hesitated at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. What if it wasn't her? What if it was? A young boy burst from the door, nearly colliding with him. "Pardon, sir," the child exclaimed, then dashed away down the street. Blackmere steadied himself and stepped inside. The interior was clean and orderly, smelling of herbs and soap. Several patients sat waiting, while a young woman made notes in a ledger at a small desk. "May I help you, sir?" she asked, looking up. "I'm looking for Mrs. Ashton," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "She's with a patient just now. If you'll wait, she shouldn't be long." He took a seat on one of the wooden benches, observing the operation of the dispensary. Everything spoke of careful management and limited resources, well deployed. The patients were mostly working people, a farmer with a bandaged hand, a woman with a feverish child, an elderly man struggling to breathe. A door opened at the back of the room, and she emerged. For years had changed her, but not in the ways he might have expected. Lady Evelyn, now Mrs. Ashton, moved with quiet confidence, her simple dress and practical apron, a stark contrast to the elaborate gowns she had once worn. Her hair, once arranged in fashionable styles, was now simply braided and pinned at the nape of her neck. But it was her expression that struck him most, serene, purposeful, unburdened by the need to please. She did not see him at first, focused on giving instructions to a young mother about her child's medicine. Her voice was gentle but firm, and the woman nodded gratefully before departing. When she finally turned and saw him, her composure faltered only briefly, a slight widening of the eyes, a momentary stillness. Then she straightened her spine, just as she had that night on the terrace, and approached. "May I be of assistance?" she asked, as if he were any stranger. He stood, acutely aware of the other patients watching. "Mrs. Ashton, I believe. I wonder if I might speak with you privately on a matter of some importance." She studied him, her gaze direct in a way it never had been in society. "I have patients waiting, Mr. Black," he supplied, "from London." Something flickered in her eyes, recognition of his poor attempt at disguise, perhaps, but she merely nodded. "I can spare a few minutes after we close at 4 o'clock. If you wish to return then." It was a dismissal, polite but firm. The Duke of Blackmere, unaccustomed to being dismissed by anyone, found himself nodding in agreement. "Until 4 then," he said, and left the dispensary. He spent the hours walking the small town, observing the lives that depended on his lands. He had never seen his face. He visited the church, the small school, the marketplace. Everywhere, he heard the same story. The dispensary had transformed the health of the community, and Mrs. Ashton was respected for her knowledge and compassion. At precisely 4 o'clock, he returned. The last patient was just leaving, an old woman leaning heavily on a cane. "God bless you, Mrs. Ashton," she said as she passed Blackmere at the door. "My joints haven't felt this good in years." Inside, Evelyn was wiping down surfaces with a cloth soaked in something that smelled of vinegar. She did not look up when he entered. "Close the door, Your Grace," she said quietly. "If we are to have this conversation, I prefer it be private." He did as instructed, then stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. This was not how he had imagined their reunion. He the supplicant, she the one in control. "How did you find me?" she asked, finally looking at him. "Estate ledgers. Quarterly payments to this dispensary and to a cottage property, authorized with my seal, but not by my hand." She nodded, unsurprised. "Mr. Hargreaves. He was your father's man before he was yours. He knew what the codicil contained and what its destruction meant, so she had known about the document. The realization startled him. You knew. Not until after, she said. Hargreaves found me before I could leave the country. He explained what my father and your uncle had arranged, how I was to be the condition upon which your inheritance depended, how you destroyed the codicil rather than allow such manipulation. She set down her cloth and faced him directly. He also told me you chose to reject me publicly rather than reveal my father's scheming. You thought it was protection. It felt like cruelty. The simple truth of her words struck him like a physical blow. He had acted from duty, yes, but also from pride, the arrogant belief that he knew best, that his judgment should prevail without question. I was wrong, he said, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. In my method, if not my intent. Evelyn studied him, her expression unreadable. Why are you here, Your Grace? After 4 years, what could possibly remain to be said? The question hung between them, laden with the weight of time and choices that could not be unmade. Outside, rain began to fall again, a soft patter against the dispensary windows. I came to understand, he said finally, and perhaps if you are willing, to make amends. The dispensary felt smaller with just the two of them inside it. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the world beyond into indistinct shapes and muted colors. Evelyn moved with practiced efficiency, continuing her end-of-day tasks, as if the Duke of Blackmere were not standing in her domain. You've built something remarkable here, he said, breaking the silence. She glanced at him briefly. Necessity built it. I merely helped organize what was already needed. The ledgers show substantial improvements over the past 3 years. New roof, expanded facilities, regular supplies of medicines that would be beyond the means of most rural dispensaries. Evelyn's hand stilled on the jar she was labeling. Are you here to audit your investment, Your Grace? No, he said quickly. I only meant to acknowledge your accomplishment. It is not my accomplishment alone. She resumed her work. Dr. Winters provides the medical expertise. The community provides what they can, in goods and services. I merely manage resources. Resources that include Blackmere funds. She set the jar down with deliberate care. Yes, Mr. Hargreaves arranged it. I did not ask for your money. I'm not suggesting you did. Then what are you suggesting? Her voice remained calm, but he could see tension in the line of her shoulders. Blackmere moved closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. I'm not suggesting anything, Lady Mrs. Ashton. I'm trying to understand. What is there to understand? You made your position clear 4 years ago. I made my choice accordingly, by disappearing without a word, by letting society believe you were destroyed by rejection. A flash of something, anger perhaps, crossed her face. What society believed was never my concern. I did not disappear for effect, Your Grace. I disappeared because there was nothing left for me there. The simplicity of her statement silenced him. She was right, of course. After his public rejection, what options would have remained for her? A lifetime of pitying glances? Marriage to someone who would always know she had aimed higher and failed. I apologize, he said finally, both for the past and for disturbing your present. Evelyn looked at him fully then, her gaze assessing. Why now? After 4 years, why seek me out? He could have mentioned the ledgers, the discovery of the unauthorized payments. But the truth was simpler and more difficult to admit. Because I have thought of you, he said, more often than I should, more often than makes sense. She turned away, resuming her task of organizing supplies. Guilt is a poor foundation for anything, Your Grace. It's not guilt, he insisted, then paused. Not only guilt. A knock at the door interrupted them. Evelyn moved to answer it, revealing a worried-looking woman cradling a small child. Mrs. Ashton, it's little Emma. Her fever's back something fierce. Without hesitation, Evelyn ushered them in. Bring her to the examination room. I'll fetch Dr. Winters. Blackmere watched as she transformed, from the woman engaged in a difficult conversation with him, to a capable professional focused entirely on the needs before her. She disappeared through a back door, returning moments later with an elderly man who moved directly to the mother and child. Your Grace, Evelyn said quietly, we must attend to this. If you wish to continue our conversation, perhaps tomorrow would be better. He nodded, understanding the dismissal. Tomorrow, then. May I call in the morning? The dispensary opens at 8, she replied, already turning to assist the doctor. Blackmere left, stepping into the rain without bothering to raise his collar against it. The cold droplets against his skin were a welcome distraction from the tumult of his thoughts. He returned the next morning to find the dispensary already busy. Evelyn moved among the patients with quiet efficiency. Her attention focused on their needs rather than his presence. He took a seat on one of the benches and waited, content for now to observe her in this life she had created. An hour passed before the last morning patient departed. Evelyn approached him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're persistent, Your Grace." A family trait, he acknowledged, though not always applied wisely. The hint of a smile touched her lips. "We have an hour before the midday patients arrive. Would you care to see the rest of the dispensary?" He accepted the olive branch for what it was. She led him through the small building, the examination room, the storage area for medicines, the tiny office where records were kept. In this last room, he noticed the ledger open on the desk. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward it. She hesitated, then nodded. He approached the desk and looked down at the careful columns of numbers and notes. Each entry represented a life touched, a service provided. And there, in the income column, was the notation he had expected. "Blackmere Trust, quarterly disbursement." "You knew," he said, looking up at her. "You knew the money came from my estates." Evelyn's expression remained neutral. "I discovered it approximately a year ago." Mr. Hargreaves had been vague about the source of the funds, referring only to a private benefactor. When he died last winter, his replacement was more forthcoming. "And yet you continued to accept it." "The dispensary needs it," she said simply. "My pride is not worth the suffering its absence would cause." The pragmatism of her response struck him. The Evelyn he had known in society had been idealistic, sometimes naively so. This woman understood compromise and necessity. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Now that you know about the arrangement, what would you have me do?" She seemed surprised by the question. "It's not my place to dictate what you do with your resources, Your Grace. It is if those resources support your work," he countered. "Tell me what the dispensary needs, and I will see it provided properly, openly, with my full knowledge and consent." Evelyn studied him, wariness evident in her posture. "And what would you expect in return?" The question hurt more than he had anticipated. "Nothing. This is not a transaction, Mrs. Ashton. Consider it reparation, if you must assign it a purpose." "Reparation," she repeated, testing the word. "For what precisely?" "For my manner, if not my decision. For allowing pride to dictate method. For not trusting you with the truth." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the ledger between them. When she finally looked up, her expression was resolved. "I will accept your support for the dispensary, because it is needed. But I will not return to London. I will not resume my former life. And I will not be an object of your guilt or your charity." "I'm not asking you to be," he said quietly. "Then what are you asking, Your Grace?" The question hung between them, demanding an honesty he was not sure he could provide. What did he want from this woman who had rebuilt her life from the ashes of his rejection? "For now," he said carefully, "I am asking only to know you as you are now, not as I imagined you to be." Something shifted in her eyes, not softening exactly, but a recognition, a willingness to consider. That, she said, may be possible. For 3 days, the Duke of Blackmere remained in Northfield. Each morning, he appeared at the dispensary, not as a patron or overseer, but as an observer. He sat quietly, watching Evelyn work, occasionally assisting with simple tasks when asked. In the afternoons, when the dispensary closed for an hour, they would walk through the town, their conversations cautious, but increasingly honest. He learned that she had studied medicine informally for years, that her work at the dispensary fulfilled ambitions she had never dared voice in society. She learned that he had reformed much of Blackmere's management, that his coldness masked not indifference, but an acute awareness of responsibility. Neither spoke of the past directly, circling it like wary dancers, avoiding a weakness in the floor, until the 4th day, when clouds gathered ominously over Northfield. "There's a storm coming," Evelyn noted as they finished their afternoon walk. "You should return to the inn before it breaks." "And you to your cottage," he replied. "May I escort you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It's not far." They walked in silence as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Her cottage appeared around a bend in the road, small but well-maintained, with a neat garden, and smoke rising from the chimney. "Your housekeeper keeps a good fire," he observed. "I have no housekeeper," she replied. "I laid the fire this morning before leaving." The revelation surprised him, that she managed alone, without the servants she had grown up with. Before he could respond, the first heavy drops began to fall. "You should hurry back," she said, moving toward her door. "Evelyn," he said, using her given name for the first time since finding her. "There is something I must tell you before I leave tomorrow." She turned, key in hand. "Can it not wait until morning? I fear if I wait, I may lose my resolve." The rain intensified suddenly, falling in sheets that quickly soaked them both. She glanced at the deluge, then at him, and sighed. "Come inside then, but only until the worst passes." The cottage interior was simple, but comfortable. A small sitting room with worn but quality furniture. A desk covered in papers and medical texts. A fireplace with the promised fire burning steadily. It was a home, he realized, not merely a shelter. Evelyn removed her wet shawl and hung it near the fire. "Say what you came to say, Your Grace." He reached into his coat and withdrew a document, protected from the rain by its placement in an inner pocket. "This is for you." She took it cautiously, unfolding the paper. Her eyes widened as she read. "This is a legal renunciation," she said, looking up at him. "You're formally dissolving any claim Blackmere might have over the dispensary funds or the cottage." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you deserve to be free of my influence, whether benevolent or otherwise." She studied the document again. "This also includes a substantial endowment for the dispensary, independent of Blackmere. The community needs it," he said, echoing her earlier pragmatism, "and you have built something worthy of support." Evelyn carefully refolded the paper. "Thank you. This is unexpected." "There is more," he said, his voice tighter than he intended. "But I'm not sure I have the right to say it." She looked at him steadily. "After 4 years, and all that has passed between us, I think we are beyond concerns of propriety." "Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected. "My name is Alexander." The rain hammered against the windows, filling the silence that followed. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating her face in stark relief, the strength in her features, the wariness in her eyes. "Very well, Alexander," she said finally. "What else do you wish to say?" The words he had rehearsed deserted him. Instead, he moved toward the door. "I should go. The rain is torrential," she finished. "And you are avoiding my question." He turned back to her, struck by how different she was from the young woman he had rejected. That Evelyn had been eager to please, careful never to challenge. This woman stood her ground, demanding truth. "I have spent 4 years building a life that does not depend on the approval or protection of others," she continued. "If you have something to say it plainly." "I was wrong," he said, the words rushing out. "Not just in how I rejected you, but in rejecting you at all." She stilled. "What do you mean?" "The codicil was real. The manipulation by our families was real. But my coldness, that was pride and fear, not protection." "Fear of what?" "Of wanting something for myself, rather than for Blackmere." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "And what did you want?" "You," he said simply. "Your conversation. Your perspective. Your company." She turned away, moving to the window, to watch the storm. "It's too late for such admissions, Alexander." "I know," he acknowledged. "I'm not asking you to return with me. I'm not asking anything of you. I only wanted you to know the truth before I left." She remained silent, her back to him, her reflection in the glass unreadable. The storm raged outside, matching the tumult he felt within. "I should go," he said again, reaching for the door. "Wait." He paused, hand on the latch. Evelyn turned to face him. "If you leave now in this storm, what story will you tell yourself about why you came here?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't understand." "Will you tell yourself you made amends, that you did your duty, that your conscience is clear?" "No," he said honestly. "I will tell myself that I found you well and free, and that I left you that way." Something in her expression changed, a softening, a recognition. "And is that enough?" "It has to be." She moved toward him then, stopping just out of reach. "4 years ago, you made a decision for both of us without consulting me. Are you doing the same now?" The accusation struck home. He had come with the document, with his confession, with his intention to leave, all decided without her input. "You're right," he admitted. "What would you have me do, Evelyn?" "Kneel," she said quietly. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees before her. There in the small cottage with rain lashing the windows and thunder rolling overhead. "Not out of guilt," she continued, her voice steady. "Not out of duty, but as a man facing a woman as his equal." "As my equal," he agreed, looking up at her. "Always." Spring came to Northfield County with gentle persistence, green pushing through soil still cold from winter. The dispensary's blue door stood freshly painted, a small brass plaque beside it now. Northfield County Dispensary and School of Practical Medicine. Inside, students, mostly young women from the surrounding villages, gathered around a table where Evelyn demonstrated the preparation of a tincture. Her movements were precise, her explanations clear. At the back of the room, Alexander watched, his presence no longer remarkable to the staff or patients. The proportion must be exact, she was saying. Too little, and the remedy is ineffective. Too much, and it becomes harmful. A fitting metaphor, he thought, for what had grown between them over the months since that stormy night. Neither too fast nor too presumptuous. A careful balance of independence and connection. When the lesson concluded, the students dispersed to their assigned tasks. Evelyn approached him, a small smile playing at her lips. "You're early today," she observed. The solicitor finished the paperwork sooner than expected. He offered her a document. "The dispensary is now officially an independent trust. Your position as director is secured regardless of—" He hesitated. "Regardless of what becomes of us." She finished for him. Yes, she took the document, her fingers brushing his. Such small touches had become their language, tentative at first, then increasingly confident. Never presumptuous, always conscious. "Thank you," she said. "This means a great deal to me." "I know." He hesitated, then added, "I've also completed arrangements at Blackmere, if you would still like to see it." The invitation had been extended weeks ago, during one of their evening conversations, by her fire, not as a duchess returning to her rightful place, but as a guest, perhaps eventually more, visiting on her own terms. "I would," she confirmed, "when the term ends for the students next week." They walked together through the dispensary, now expanded to include classrooms and additional treatment rooms. The endowment he had provided, independent of his personal fortune, structured to continue regardless of their personal relationship, had transformed what had been a modest facility into a genuine institution. "Dr. Winters tells me the applications for next term have doubled," she said as they stepped outside into the spring sunshine. "Women from as far as York have applied. Your reputation grows," he noted with pride that sought no ownership. "Our reputation," she corrected. "Your support made much of this possible." "Money only builds structures," he countered. "You built something far more valuable." They walked through the town, nodding to those they passed. No one curtsied or bowed to the Duke anymore. He was simply Mr. Black to most of Northfield now. The gentleman who supported their dispensary and walked with Mrs. Ashton on fair days. "Have you told your family you'll be bringing a guest to Blackmere?" she asked as they reached the small bridge over the stream that marked the edge of town. "I've told them I'm bringing the woman I hope to marry," he replied, "when she is ready, and if she will have me." Evelyn stopped, turning to face him. "Alexander, it's not a proposal," he assured her quickly. "Not yet. That will come when, if you indicate you would welcome it. I only wanted them to understand that when you visit, it is as my equal and my choice, not as an obligation or a convenience." She studied him, this man who had once shattered her world with cold words, who now shaped his life around her comfort and autonomy. "And if I am never ready," she asked, the question honest rather than coy, "then I will count myself fortunate to know you in whatever capacity you allow." The simplicity of his answer, its lack of manipulation or pressure, seemed to satisfy her. She nodded and resumed walking, her hand finding his with deliberate intent. "I am not the same woman you rejected," she said after a moment. "Thank God for that," he replied with unexpected fervor. "She was trying so hard to be what others wanted, that I never truly saw her." Evelyn smiled, a full expression that transformed her face. "And I am not interested in the man who rejected her. I much prefer the one who knelt in my cottage during a thunderstorm." They had reached the crossroads, one path leading back to the dispensary, the other to her cottage. By unspoken agreement, they turned toward the cottage, where tea would be shared and conversation would continue until evening shadows lengthened. In London, society still occasionally whispered about the Duke of Blackmere's extended absence. Some speculated about business interests, others about political maneuvering. None guessed the truth, that he had found something in a small northern town that all his wealth and title had never provided. At Blackmere House, the great doors stood ready to welcome not a duchess returning in triumph, but a woman arriving by choice. The rain-washed stone of the threshold no longer marked a boundary between power and subservience, but a passage between two lives freely shared. And that both Alexander and Evelyn had discovered made all the difference.